And with that, I'm going to move my things. Can everyone see my slides well enough when they're small like this? I'm going to take that as a yes unless you put no in the chat. Okay, perfect. And the reason is because when you're not taking turns, it's easier to be able to maneuver your stuff when you can see it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to assume that you guys know our mission and vision, but just say the piece of it we are dealing with today is the equity piece. So grading with equity. Here are our norms. If we realize some of you are eating now, if you are eating now and you do not want to eat on camera, I totally get it. Sometimes I do like to ask you like number 1, 2, 3, or 4, you know, visually, but we're not going to ask you to be on camera if this is your little bit of time off camera and you prefer it that way. That being said, be technology ready. I think it's technology ready should always include a pencil and paper as well as your device. And with that, we're going to move right along. I'm going to repeat myself one more time because some people have been added new. If you are attending this is part 2. And if you have not attended part 1, we have a Zoom link to part 1 in the chat. Click on that link. You'll be asked to leave this meeting and you'll go to my good friend, Nicole Freeland, and she will lead you through part 1. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about our learning intention, which is to learn best practices for choosing tasks, determining criteria for grading, assigning grades, and communicating with families. We will know we're successful when we're able to use provided resources to assist us with all of that stuff. And if you do not have it, this little picture here is our guidance document for rubric grading. I highly recommend that you click on it and add it to your drive. So if you're in the presentation.
Tenemos una junta ahorita bien rápida y luego ya después las otras las tengo a las 3:15.
Go ahead, and if you are in the presentation, go ahead and do that. And then we will work on getting that taken care of. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to kind of start a little bit of review, maybe in a different way, but it's a little bit more why. So we have here the drawbacks of traditional grading. And what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to read one, and then I'm going to ask you in the drawbacks, and I'm going to ask you to read how to make it more objective. So one drawback is assessments are based on percentage systems. Criteria for success may be unclear. Take a minute and read how to make that more objective. And think about which of these is most important, because that's going to be your question when we're done. Which is most important? Okay, 2, everything goes in the grade book regardless of purpose. How do we fix that? Let's read number 2 on the other side. Make it more objective. We really covered that last time, right? Grade less. Choose essential outcomes. 3, include every score regardless of when it was corrected. And how do we correct that? By making it more objective. Okay. 4, assessments record the average, not the best work. And how are we going to fix that? Read number 4. Then I would like to ask you in the chat, which of those do you find most important? I got a number 1. I got a number 2. And then what I would love to do at this point is remind you, if you have not attended session 1, there's a link to session 1 in the chat. Otherwise, I want to hear just at least from one person unmuted who feels passionately about the number they chose. So now I have several 2s, a 4, a 1. So who would like to unmute? And just hit your space bar and start. Do not wait for me to call on you because I can't see you.
Okay, I'll go.
Perfect.
I feel number 1 is the most important because if you don't have a rubric, you don't have a true guideline, and you don't know how to guide the students to where they need to go. And that goes for the second part of it, the criteria for student success is determined ahead of learning. That's our roadmap. If we don't have that, then we can't create effective grades that reflect their learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, and we talked about how meaningless a percentage can be sometimes. 90% on a hard assignment is not the same as 90% on an easy assignment. So absolutely. And it fits right in with our teaching, right? We plan for success criteria.
Yes.
So absolutely. Okay. Anyone else? All right. I'm going to move us into kind of what's new for this session. Okay. So if you were in part 1, you remember that we spent the bulk of our time really addressing the why and then identifying those essential learning tasks. So we talked about how do we narrow and grade less. Okay, essential learning outcomes. Once you have those outcomes, you can choose tasks. So today we're going to stick with the examples we used last time because we already know them and because, let's face it, science doesn't get enough thought, right? So this is the essential learning outcome, right? Students will know the parts of the plant that help them grow. And then the task that went with it, we had 2 examples here from, 2 hypothetical teachers. So what you would have to do next is, how are you going to get a 4, 3, 2, or 1? What is the criteria, like Mindy said, okay? And so that's what we're going to move into first. And we're going to take a look at this example first, okay? So when you look at this example, and we remember we talked about that, we kind of liked the other example better, but it doesn't mean that we would never use this, okay? What would this grade be? If you get 100% on this, are you exceeding the standard? And so and the answer to that is no, right? If you're just labeling something and quite possibly copying the labels because those are all spelled perfectly, it's hard to say you're exceeding the standard or exceeding on that outcome, right? So the first thing we want to know before we go on is not everything gets a 4. Some assignments, 3 might be the max they can get because they're meeting expectation, okay? And then what really we want to know, like some other examples would that be like, do these 4 addition problems. I just want to see if you can add 4 simple, straightforward addition problems, okay? And that's going to be a max of a 3, right? If that's your grade level standard, okay? Another example could be at the end of kindergarten, if a student knows all their letters, is that exceeding standard? It is not. Right now it could be exceeding standard, but at the end of kindergarten, they have hit the max. The max you can do is know them all. That is not an exceeding standard, that is meeting expectation, okay? So that's a simple one. Let's get into something a little more complex. So remember we had the drawing and the label example last time? How do we determine a 4, 3, 2, or 1 from this? And these questions for discussion come straight from the guidance document that I had linked next to our success criteria. So these are, PLC questions. So we're going to take a moment, look at those, and make sure you have the, Montreal, do you mind? Oh, you do, the link to the presentation, because we're going to send you to breakout rooms, and one person needs to be able to share their screen, or everybody needs to have it up so you can refer to these. So the outcome is students will know the parts of a plant that help them grow, but the direction students were given is make a drawing of the plant, label the parts, include the details in your drawing that show where the environment, where the plant gets what it needs, okay? So have these, discuss these questions and talk about what is a 4, 3, 2, and 1. I am going to send you to breakout rooms. If I can get the rest of my Zoom meeting controls. And go ahead and accept your invitation. And again, go over those questions. We'll give you about 4 minutes.
We have one more coming in.
Okay. Hi, Gloria. Did you happen to attend part 1? Hi, Gloria. Did you attend part 1 of this session?
No, I didn't. Should I have attended the first one before I joined?
Yeah, well, you know what? There's a link to part 1 in the chat right here.
Uh-huh.
So if you open up the chat, just click on that link. It'll take you to part 1.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Uh-huh. All right, I forgot to set my timer, but I'm going to do 1 minute and then.
It hasn't been 4 minutes.
Oh, no, for sure. I need to do my controls. Sometimes, like when I scroll, I just can't get my. Where do I do my screen sharing?
On the bottom.
Where do I do my enable screen sharing for other people?
Maybe it's the 3 dots
Oh, I need to stop sharing my screen so they
to
can.
be able to do it. And then on the bottom on screen share, there's one participant and then multiple can share simultaneously.
There we go.
I went to a breakout room 5, but I couldn't hear anything.
Really? Let me
Yeah.
put you in another and see if it works, okay?
Okay, thank you. Oops.
Let's see. Okay, that one should work. I thought I only had 4 rooms. I didn't scroll down far enough. So she was in a room with you.
Yeah, because I was in room 5 and I didn't go into room 5.
So anyone who watches this video can know that I'm a dingbat.
Well, here
All right, I'm gonna go ahead now.
we're admitting one more.
Okay, let's see. Who is, you know what, where we have some nice people, maybe room 3, somebody's all alone in there. Hi, Cynthia, I just sent you, oh, perfect, she added. I'm gonna give Cynthia about 20 seconds.
Are we doing another breakout?
This is the only breakout.
Oh, because I should have ordered lunch while I was on breakout. Because I didn't get to meal prep for today.
I went to the store and I bought things for the next week. That's weird. Okay, I'm gonna close these rooms.
Okay.
Because now it said Yesenia Ruba Kalba was in room 5 all alone, but then Cindy, the other person, said she was in there. I'm gonna share my screen now.
We have another person coming in.
We'll put that link in the chat, okay?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that right now.
If you are joining us late, this is part 2 of a 2-part series. Montrell is putting a link in the chat. If you did not attend part 1, this makes a lot more sense if you attend part 1. So just go ahead and click into that part 1 Zoom link from the chat and you can catch up. We have Nicole Freeland in there. It'll ask you to leave this room. And we have 3 seconds. Cindy and Teresa, and a couple people are going strong. All right. Welcome back, guys. Okay, so what are your thoughts? What were some of the highlights of your conversations? If I could have someone just unmute and share. And you don't have to raise your hand, you can just start. Any debates or disagreements? You guys are chatty today. Okay, I am going, okay, so how about this? Maybe just a reaction, like a thumbs up, or how are these questions at kind of getting you to think about these assignments and what the criteria would be? How's that? I saw a nod from Mindy. For sure. Ooh, a thumbs up in the reactions. Okay, I can live with that. All right.
Hey, Stephanie, what grade was this?
I believe this is a 2nd grade standard. I know that kind of makes, but we were trying to make it like not grade level specific with our.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You know what? I'm sorry. It's a 1st grade standard.
That's what we were talking about. Because, you know, if this were kindergarten, then wow. And if this were 1st grade, there needs to be a little bit more, you know, and so we were going back and forth about that a little bit.
Okay.
So, you know.
Absolutely. So I agree. The age of the child could be, these particular samples just came from Google Images. Talked about how it might depend on what type of standard we are grading or looking at. Yes. So this standard starts out like with talking about plant and animal parts, and it ends with them understanding how their parts help with their survival. So this was maybe one outcome along the way, right? And then maybe later on they could discuss the survival. So, you know, when we kind of looked at this task and we were using it for our sample, and if you look in the guidance document, our thoughts are if they can include kind of some soil and sun, and if this is a really independent assignment, like they don't have labels to copy from. Notice this person put petals and they have leaves. That, you know, maybe there is a little room for a 4 if they're just learning the parts. But it's kind of in between a 3 and a 4. I really think what this one does. So that being said, what we're going to do now is you guys, based on your discussions, grade it. And we have the rubric here. We decided probably no one thinks this one in this sample is a 1. We thought that was safe to say it's not a 1. But go ahead and put in the chat what you think, what grade do you think this should get? Okay. So I see a lot of 3s. I think there's an argument here. Like personally, I see an argument for a 3. I see an argument for a 4. It just depends on what you've taught. I could see it, I think when we made our sample saying, if they include the environment on their own, we could say there's room for 4. If my outcome is that they know the parts, then, you know, knowing how having those other elements could get them a 4. But that being said, it really depends on the level of independence, because if I have these up on the board, these labels, maybe not. And then was I really clear that I wanted them to use the word flower and not petals in my teaching? Then I would say maybe this isn't a 4, right? So really it connects to what you taught as well. Any thoughts about that or questions?
Yeah, no, my breakout person who was with me brought up the fact that the elements were included. And then we talked about how the student used the word petals instead of flower. And that's, you know, drilling it down a little bit more. And so we really talked a lot about that. And they included a sun, which we were wondering if the photosynthesis discussion kind of had taken place. So there.
Right. And so they do learn that plants, you know, they need, the leaves help them. I think it says something like make food from the sun, although they don't really talk much about photosynthesis. So yeah, the fact that they have the soil there and the sun, and I see that word petals. If I had a class and someone said petals and I said, wow, that's a fancy word, then everybody in my room would probably use the word petals and it would have been my fault, right? But if I had been clear, like, no, you need to say flowers because the seeds are in the flowers and that's how you get a new one, right? So it really goes to like what you taught and how you taught it, whether that word petals, in my opinion, without knowing, you know, what happened in this classroom. So yeah, I think there's argument for a 3 or a 4. I would like to point out, this doesn't necessarily go that far beyond the schedule, but the outcome, but I really think it's important, this application of skills and the consistency, accuracy, and independence. And I feel like there's a lot more independence without the labels. They actually have to create the drawing and label it. So the level of independence, independently knowing that when they're starting with a blank piece of paper might be, you know, something to consider too. But it's all about making the decision on what it's going to be ahead of time. That way you teach to what it's going to be. Like I think Mindy had mentioned earlier, those success criteria are so important. So really, this is that idea of assigning grades, right? There will be times when you can just say, hey, you guys, 9 or 10 out of 10, we're going to call that a 4, right? If you have a couple of those zingers in your math CFA, you might have to say, in order to get a 4, they have to get number 10 right, right? So sometimes it's going to be a straight cut score, like they get this many right, it's a 3, this many right, it's a 2. Some things like writing are qualitative, and you're going to have to kind of decide what a student needs to do to earn a 3, 4, or whichever score. Okay. But really that is the idea. You have to figure out what is a 4, 3, 2, or 1. What will a student have to do? So that's that middle step. After you've done that, and we said this person gets probably a 3, it looks like from the consensus here, then we have to communicate the grades. So we're going to move on to the next step, which is communicating grades to students and families. And we know that report cards are not and even progress reports are not our first time communicating. That's not good practice. So this little quote here in purple, I'm going to let you read it. But what I'm going to say is, if you are using 1, 2, 3, and 4 on report cards, which we are, then we need to be communicating to parents in terms of 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can't put 95% A, send that home, and then the report card, they get a 4 and they don't know what that means. Okay. So do you see this little rubric stapled to the paper? That's ideal if we're teaching in purpose or in person, right? But we did make these rubrics in English and Spanish. They're in the guidance document that we gave you. And we made them 3 to a page smaller, so you could add them to the bottom of a Google Doc or share them with parents in Parent Square, however. So for that narrow amount of assignments that you've graded, you can give parents a rubric like this so they understand what the grades mean as you're attaching them. Okay. Any questions on that so far? All right, I'm going to move on. So that's ongoing communication. So the assignment grades get communicated to parents in the same language they'll see on the report card. Now, remember Keisha and Zach? Let's talk about, now we have some grades in the grade book, but we need to give an overall grade, and we might get not a round number. Can we look at Zach first, even though he's on the right side? Look at his average. He's pretty straightforward. Maybe show me visually if you're on camera or put it in the chat. What's his overall grade for science based on these scores? Okay, 2. You guys are getting a 4 because yes, you're getting the answers right. Thank you. He's a 2. That's pretty straightforward because that's pretty close to a 2. Okay, let's look at Keisha because she's not really, I mean, you know, in math we round up at 3.5. But let's look at the names of her assignments and which one she got a 4 on and which one she got a 3 on. So for Keisha, what would you give her as a grade? And just add it to the chat. And obviously we're guessing because these aren't our students, right? I see a lot of 3s. And we really wanted to make that point. A 4 means you're exceeding the standards. So when you come to something like a 3.5, 3.6, you may not feel comfortable giving a 4, okay? And you don't have to go straight math with this. Think of that rubric and what it says about meeting standards, students who meet standards. They're consistent, they're accurate, but think about that ability to demonstrate knowledge beyond and that ability to be independent. So it may be the case that you decide, even in the case of a student, I think my daughter is not wanting to do her homework. I apologize. I would mute myself, but that really is not conducive right now. Anyhow, you guys are 4s because you got that. That we're not just going to round up. It's not just about math. Wanted to give you one more example. So here's Keisha again. Here's her reading grade. Okay, so what is your grade here? And here it's really important to look at, I think a lot of 2s. Why is it a 2 and not a 3 in this case? Anyone care to share?
Somebody get out there, guys. I'm doing all this sharing. Come on, somebody else, jump in, jump in.
Yes.
Hello. I feel that she gets a 2 because her reading level is kind of low, and then her high frequency words are kind of important as well because CVC. Well, it also depends. It was first grade, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I would just say her reading level and her high frequency words are a little bit, I think, more important than CVC words at some point. So I would say it would be a 2. But that was my reasoning.
I'm with you. I taught first grade and lots of kids come into CVC knowing their CVC words really well and they skid when you hit long vowels or they can't read a text. So sometimes you might think, okay, they're getting 3s in all of this, but man, when they read a book, they're not applying it. I'm not comfortable giving them a 3, and that's okay. So that's where you can use that rubric in basing your overall grade and adjusting it one way or another. If they're really close, 2.9, I probably am going to give them a 3, but when they're a little further away, that's when you get to go back to that rubric and say, where is this student in this subject? Thank you. So again, I'm going to try to get us out here at a good pace because I know a lot of you got to get in front of students. I'm going to go back to the purpose of the report cards. Okay. It's about communicating where students are at, not communicating how hard they work, how much they keep organized and get their assignments turned in. It's not about rewarding or punishing. It's about communicating where they are at in their learning. Okay, and the rubric system does a far better job, in my opinion, of that, communicating that to parents. Okay, so I want to make sure you guys know where your resources are. Okay, both of these documents are linked in here. I also want to point out that you have writing rubrics already in your ELA units that are 4321. Okay, in this grading guidebook, this is K-8, so it's not specific to rubrics, But if you don't know what your report card looks like, there's a PDF of every report card at the end of this, okay? One of the things I think that are great is communicating to parents. There's a guide to crafting comments for your report card, okay? So you can kind of see the table of contents along this side here. So I definitely recommend you check this out and use it for support. It also has the SEL grading components, information about that in there, which you'll find helpful. Then I'm going to go back here and I'm going to go into this one that's specific for rubric grading. And then again, we have those outcomes listed in the beginning, those sample outcomes that we went through in part 1. But we also have some discrete skills for kindergarten, because you guys have lots of little things that can be counted, like letters and counting and sounds and different things. So there's a list to guide you in what would be exceeding and approaching for each quarter. Those exist for first grade in your units, like your units have them within them, but you only have a couple things that are just kind of a straight count like that. And then there's also, there's PLC questions throughout, okay? And advice for communicating. And when we go to the communicating grades to parents, if I can do that, for whatever reason, let's see. Here are those rubrics. So they have those smaller rubrics you can cut and paste and send to parents, and they are in Spanish as well. Okay. So with that, I'm going to take us back to our presentation, just talk about next steps. We realize that some things are hard to get a hold of. And when I say that, it's like, what do I know about my students in a virtual space? So give yourself grace, give your students grace in this time when we're trying to determine if they know something, but we can't tell as well as we can in person. Okay, next steps going forward, start labeling work with a 4, 3, 2, or 1. Letting parents know what they're getting ahead of time so they can ask what that means. Okay, maintain ongoing and consistent communication. We may not be using Aries or the parent portal, but that doesn't mean we're not communicating with parents. And then reference those guides that we gave you as support, and then you can always email Nicole or myself. And I'd like to thank Montrell for helping me with the chat today, and I'll take any questions. Otherwise, I want to let you back. There's an evaluation here, and Montrell already has it in the chat for you. So thank you guys so much.